Greetings, VFI News supporters and anyone else watching this report. I'm Barry Segal, and this is the VFI News. After almost 21 months of battles against Iranian proxy groups in Gaza, Lebanon, Syria, Iraq, Yemen, and elsewhere in the region, Israel finally took the battle straight to the source of the problem last Friday morning. Almost 200 Israeli jets hit Iranian air defense systems, ballistic missile launchers, IRGC officials, and nuclear scientists. The air campaign was accompanied by a ground attack led by scores of Mossad agents who had infiltrated the Islamic Republic in recent years. It was a spectacularly successful opening move, and Israel followed up with more strikes that left Iran's regime almost paralyzed and teetering on the brink of collapse, but still able to launch some painful counterattacks. All that and much more is just ahead on VFI News from Israel. A few weeks ago, I posted a video in which I said was now or never for Israel to strike Iran, or we'd be condemning ourselves to live in the shadow of our failure to stop them before their nuclear weapons program went critical. I'm talking about the nuclear weapons program, which Iran has been saying for years it didn't have, even as they enriched uranium to levels totally unnecessary for the peaceful civilian energy production purposes they claim to want. Then came the revelation last week by the IAEA, the International Atomic Energy Agency, that in 2003, experiments were conducted whose only purpose was the fabrication of a trigger device for a nuclear weapon. Finally, the Board of Governors of the IAEA declared Iran to be in breach of its obligations under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. The regime petulantly replied to this rebuke by saying that they will build yet another uranium enrichment facility. Now, to switch to commentary mode for a moment, friends, I've said it before, but it bears repeating that this regime lies to everyone, including their allies, their enemies, their own people, the United Nothings, the UN, the IAEA, and everyone else in between. But the worst part of it all is that they lie to themselves. And when someone lies to themselves, the damage they do to their own mental and emotional health is devastating. You can't avoid becoming a toxic, dysfunctional mess when you lie to yourself, and when you knowingly choose to believe your own lies and deceit, or the lies and deceit that others tell you because they know it's what you want to hear. Now, once again, I said that in a video a few weeks ago that it was now or never, and this is part of the reason. Those who call for a diplomatic solution to the standoff over Iran's nuclear program forget that you can't negotiate with someone who is mentally and emotionally unstable. And the Ayatollah regime, like Hitler, which rules Iran, is way past that point. They're not just unstable, they're completely bonkers, out of their minds, and negotiating with them is a dangerous waste of time. That's the conclusion Israel came to this past week, and that more than anything else is what I believe prompted Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to give the final go-ahead for this plan, which was clearly being prepared for many years. I'm sure Netanyahu and the rest of the IDF High Command would have preferred to have the U.S. military involved in the strikes as well, but in a way, I think it might have been a good thing that Israel did this on its own, and here's why. Remember what I said about believing the lies one tells oneself being one of the most toxic and self-destructive things an individual or a nation can do? Well, for generations, the enemies of Israel have been telling themselves the lies that Israel and the Jews are a weak nation that can't fight for itself and only wins wars because the United States and other Western countries support them. For instance, to this day, if you ask people in this region how did the Israeli Air Force and how were they able to surprise the Egyptians, Syrians, and Jordanians and destroy most of their planes on the ground in the opening hours of the June 1967 Six-Day War, you'll be told that it wasn't Israeli aircraft which did this, it was British and American planes launched from aircraft carriers sailing in the Mediterranean Sea. This fairy tale has been conclusively proven to be untrue by a mountain of historical evidence. But it just won't die because pretending to believe it allows these people to continue believing the biggest lie of all, that the Jews are helpless and weak because their God has forsaken them. That's not true, and it never has been and never will be. And sooner or later, everyone is going to have to come to terms with that fact. But for now, many continue to choose the path of willful self-deception. And although they might think they're cursing Israel, the truth is they only are cursing their own lives. Now, with Israel having accomplished so much against the Iranian regime so quickly without American assistance in the attack, although American forces did help to defend Israel against the Iranian missiles, that can't be said this time. I'm sure there will still be fairy tales told about this situation in the years to come, but at least for a brief time, that's not an issue. Something that is an issue for some is the question of why Israel acted now. It's because Iran had gotten to the point in its development of nuclear weapons that it would soon be too late to stop them through military means. The diplomatic talks that Iran was holding with the United States were going nowhere very slowly, dragging out a process which was never meant to produce results, but just intended to waste time while Iran continued making steady progress towards a bomb. That video was posted several weeks ago, and I must tell you, I was beginning to really worry that the window of opportunity would slam shut and be lost forever. This was especially true since the Trump administration in the United States seemed to be willing to give the waste of time diplomatic talks endless second chances, no matter how obvious it became that the Iranians weren't serious. Then, as we were asleep here in Israel early last Friday morning, the sirens sounded all over the country, letting us know it was time to run down to our bomb shelters and protected spaces. We've grown accustomed to this routine here in Israel over recent months as the Houthi rebels in Yemen have gotten into the habit of firing one ballistic missile at us almost every 24 hours or so. Like most Israelis, when I headed to the shelter last Friday morning, I thought it was just another Houthi missile and we'd probably be down there for about 20 minutes or less, and then we go back to bed, and by the time we woke up in the morning to eat our eggs or breakfast, we'd have forgotten about it. But some of us used the opportunity of being awake to check the news feed on their phones. And that's when we saw the real story. The Israeli Air Force had launched a massive attack on Iran's nuclear, military, and political infrastructure. And the sirens were meant to send everyone to the shelters because a large barrage of ballistic missiles was expected to come in immediate response. So we sat in our shelters for a while. But then the signal came to our phones that there was no retaliatory strike headed our way. Those who could went back to sleep, and in a few hours the sun came up and everyone who raced to the nearest grocery store to stock up on essentials went and did so. No one had to tell us to do so because this is something we instinctively do anytime there's any national emergency of any kind, whether it's a war or a natural disaster or whatever else. But a few hours later, there was a formal statement made by government officials and the IDF Home Front Command advising citizens to prepare for the possibility of needing to shelter in place, at home and close to a protected space for an extended period of time. A few hours later, reports came that around 100 slow-moving drones had been fired at Israel and the Air Force would try to shoot them all down. We later found out that many of these drones were shot down by the Jordanian Air Force, thank you, Jordan, which demanded that Iran stop violating its airspace. The Israeli Air Force shot down the rest of the drones. Reports then began to come out of Iran about what had just happened. Some of the reports seemed almost too incredible to believe. They said that the Mossad had planted large numbers of agents inside Iran and that when the order was given, these agents launched a massive number of small drones that targeted Iranian air defense systems and ballistic missile launchers. Many other acts of sabotage were carried out, and this paved the way for the massive Israeli airstrikes, which included over 200 aircraft that launched hundreds of long-range missiles. Now, this might be the largest air armada to attack an enemy country since the Korean War. I'd have to check that, though. But in that jet age, the effectiveness and precision of weapons made it possible to send much smaller numbers of planes on such missions. So this attack Israel carried out on Friday morning was definitely unusual. These attacks targeted nuclear facilities, government offices, strategic weapons, and individual senior-level Iranian military and Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps officers. In all, at least 20 Iranian general officers and dozens of lower-ranking officers were eliminated in this wave of strikes. Now, most of the IRGC air and missile command structure were lured to a single meeting place that was then hit hard by Israeli plane-launched missiles, wiping them out. Another target of these strikes were Iranian nuclear scientists. In the end, at least 14 scientists who were known to be part of Iran's nuclear weapons production team were eliminated in the first few days of this air campaign. Now, I won't even try to pronounce the names of all the senior Iranian military officers, scientists, aides to Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and others who were taken down in the first few days of Israel's attack on Iran. I will simply say that these were some of the most well-trained, experienced, and competent people the Ayatollah regime had, and they will be very difficult to replace. And by the way, the Ayatollah is hiding from bunker to bunker. Because of this, and also because of the large number of ballistic missile launchers that were destroyed in the initial wave of Israeli attacks, some held out hope that Iran would not be able to mount a serious counterattack. That the first attempt at a counterattack was a large barrage of 100 drones was pretty ineffective, fueling these hopes. But then at around 8 p.m. last Friday evening, the sirens wailed again, this time because it was really a large barrage of Iranian-launched ballistic missiles totaling about 150 and coming in two waves. So we all ran to the shelters once again, and this time we had to stay there for over an hour. While there, many checked their news feeds and saw that some of the missiles had penetrated the air defense array and impacted Tel Aviv and its suburbs. Now, the IDF has been telling us for years that the air defense system is very robust, but it can't guarantee that nothing will ever get through. It's about 80 to 90% that we intercept these ballistic missiles. But it's for this reason that at Vision for Israel, we've placed hundreds of portable bomb safety shelters at locations all over Israel for the past several years. These shelters have saved lives in this conflict, and they will continue to be relevant to community life in these places for many years to come. We've placed almost 500, and we want to keep going. On that note, Hezbollah has so far obeyed an order from the Lebanese National Army not to engage with Israel in support of Iran. Now, that's got to be very disappointing for the IRGC after all they invested in Hezbollah over the years, just so they'd be prepared for this very situation. But be that as it may, Hezbollah still has a large and dangerous arsenal of weapons it could potentially fire at Israel in the future. And that's why we're continuing to place portable bomb safety shelters in Galilee communities and in towns and villages on the Golan Heights, as well as many other places. Let's not forget that the Houthis in Yemen are still pledging to continue firing ballistic missiles at Israel, although there were reports this week that some of their senior leaders have been eliminated. And without Iranian support, they're unlikely to be able to continue being a threat to Israel going forward. Be that also as it may, we have to be vigilant, and that's why we're continuing to place these safety bomb shelters. So please watch this short video about this very important project. Vision for Israel has been installing bomb safety shelters since actually around the fall of 2021. During that year, there was a barrage of rockets that came into southern Israel, particularly by the terrorist group known as Hamas, and Israel had to find a way further in order to protect its citizens, its residents across the southern part of Israel. And so we sprung into action. We felt like this was a project that we had a personal invitation to fulfill. And it's important because when these projectiles, these missiles, these rockets, whatever that is that's thrown at Israel by its enemies, there is not only the potential for somebody being killed instantly, but also there's tremendous collateral damage and people that get wounded even from shrapnel. And so if you place a safety shelter at a bus stop, or in front of a high school or community center or a kindergarten or any kind of facility that's publicly accessible, the people can run into these shelters. The children can run and find safety in them and be protected from a rocket that lands and shrapnel is scattered, which could be mortally wounding people. So it gives not only a physical protection of security, but also an emotional sense of security that you know having a shelter that you can run to in the street, outside of a store, somewhere publicly accessible, not just in someone's home, but out in the open, gives a sense of security. And I always believe that it's important for us to refer to Scripture. In Psalm 91, the whole chapter talks about God providing us a shelter. And we have seen amazing deliverances from enemy rockets as a result. And now we've installed over 400 shelters across the southern and northern borders of Israel. And they weigh 30,000 kilos each, or that's 30 tons. And it's a lot of weight on rebar and concrete that's been specially mixed, and also with a special metal ramp that allows physically impaired people to be able to come up in a walker or a wheelchair on a moment's notice. In many of these areas, residents don't have any longer than between 5 seconds to maximum 45 seconds to get into a shelter to be protected. Welcome back, friends. Now, I want to pick up the timeline and recall as late as last Friday afternoon, there were hopes that Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, which controls the ballistic missile and nuclear programs, by the way, would be too shocked and disorganized to mount an effective counterattack. But then, as I said, the sirens wailed again on Friday evening, sending us all into the shelters. And some of the missiles fired in that barrage impacted in Israeli cities. The number of dead and wounded Israelis, almost all civilians, continued to climb as the days have gone on. And there was also massive property damage in Tel Aviv, Haifa, Rehovot, Herzliya, Bat Yam, Rishon LeZion, and even the small Israeli Arab village of Tamra. Now, in this small village, an Iranian missile hit a family home that didn't have a protected space, killing a mother and her 2 daughters, as well as another woman who's part of the extended family. Several other members of this family, of Arab Christians, by the way, were wounded in the strike. And I can only reiterate what I said about Vision for Israel's efforts to protect and provide shelters to Israeli communities. We supply these shelters to both Jewish and Arab communities as well as others. But there is a particular need for them also in the Arab villages. The reasons for that are complicated and sensitive, and I don't want to get into it here. But the point is that there is a need, and we're trying to fill that need. So we'd very much appreciate your support in this project. Now, while the Israeli home front has been under fire from Iranian missiles, Iran was getting absolutely hammered. In the capital city of Tehran, the Israeli Air Force hit sites that house parts of the nuclear enterprise, military installations, and airports, seaports, police stations, and energy infrastructure. The blows to Iran's clerical regime and the IRGC were not only coming from Israeli aircraft and Mossad sabotage squads on the ground. Apparently, domestic opposition groups were also active in hitting regime targets. For instance, on Sunday, a series of car bombs rocked the streets of major Iranian cities, and somehow someone did something to the plumbing, sending floods of raw sewage into the streets of several Tehran neighborhoods. That is so unbelievably icky that I don't even want to think about it, and I actually feel sorry for the people who had to deal with it. If the plumbing was sabotaged at IRGC headquarters, I don't feel sorry for those guys, but for ordinary people, I have a lot of sympathy. Because of the airstrikes, the car bombs, the sabotage plumbing, the fumes from the massive fires that broke out at fuel refineries and natural gas pumping stations, and just the general misery of it all. Tens of thousands of people tried to flee Tehran, mostly trying to move to more rural areas in the north. But because so many people were trying so, at the same time, it led to a massive traffic jam that just made things worse. Might have been like the Exodus. By Monday afternoon, the IDF was claiming complete air supremacy in the skies over western Iran, up to and including the skies over Tehran, and they were warning all civilians to get out of the city as quickly as they could, as well as President Trump came out stating the same thing. There are many more regime targets in the city, and the IDF plans to hit them all, including the bunkers where surviving members of the regime are hiding, including the Ayatollah. You can't run and you can't hide. On that note, it's important to point out that Israeli intelligence knew exactly which bunker Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei was sent to when the Israeli strikes began. They could easily have hit this bunker, but according to reliable reports, this idea was vetoed by President Trump, who reasonably asked who would be able to sign a surrender deal when the time came. Who cares, if you ask me? As best as we can tell, folks, Khamenei is now hiding in an even deeper bunker with his 3 sons desperately trying to figure out what to do next. His options are very limited, but for now, he seems to have fallen back on his default mode, which it will be a lie as never before. His foreign minister, Abbas Araghchi, has issued several statements to the effect that Iran will be willing to stop its devastating and merciless attacks on Tel Aviv if Israel agrees to surrender. I'm only exaggerating slightly here, friends. This really does seem to sum up the Iranian position at this point. They don't want to admit that obvious truth that everyone can see, that they're losing badly and they need a ceasefire much more than Israel does. Now, I won't presume to speak for anyone else, but on the very unlikely chance that anyone in Tehran is watching this report, I must tell them that the missile strikes on our cities are painful, but not catastrophic. We can keep this up for a long time, much longer than you can out there. On the other hand, long-suffering people of Iran have been brutalized by their own government for over 40 years, starting with the Islamic Revolution in 1979 that was accompanied by a brutal removal of the civil rights Iranian citizens had enjoyed under the Shah dynasty. I know the Shah wasn't perfect, but what replaced him was infinitely much worse. Then came the war with Saddam Hussein's Iraq, which lasted 8 years, which brought more repression, and up till today the regime has one of the worst human rights records of any governing regime in the world. This is the reason that the Mossad had so much success infiltrating Iran, because there are so many people there who hate their own government and are ready to cooperate with its enemies. How do you think the Mossad knew how and where all these strategic weapons and other important assets the regime had all over Iran so the Air Force could target them? On that note, the IDF had already claimed to have destroyed almost all of Iran's air defense systems and about 1/3 of its missile launchers so far, along with much of the regime's senior leadership. It's very similar to what Israel did to Hezbollah last September, and for everyone's sake, I hope this can be ended quickly with the regime's surrender, but I guess that's up to them. President Trump has urged Iran to agree to a deal, and there are indications that he's prepared to increase direct military support for this attack on Iran if they fail to take his advice. That will be useful to Israel for all kinds of reasons, especially as the Israeli Air Force does not have the tools it needs to deal a death blow to Iran's nuclear program by hitting the underground enrichment facilities at Fordow. For that, we'll need help from the United States Air Force's fleet of strategic bombers armed with the massive ordnance penetrator bomb called Moab, M-O-A-B. Now, a moment ago, I said that Israel could go like this for much longer than Iran can, and that's true, but it doesn't mean we're not hurting. Many Israeli families are struggling. As of now, over 700 are displaced from their homes. And this was and has brought us to an emergency situation similar to the bad old days of COVID-19, with a resulting hit to the Israeli economy. Vision for Israel has never been busier providing relief to families and communities in need, and those needs are going to grow because we now have another cohort of people who have been made homeless because their apartments were destroyed by Iranian missiles. Those people will need a lot of help, and we're here to help who we can. So please watch this short video about our assistance programs. We all know that since October 7th, 2023, Israel has faced really tremendous challenges, not only because of the death and destruction that happened along the southern border of Israel in many of our communities, but also across the northern border, to where at one point we had over 100,000 Israeli residents and citizens, both Jews and Arabs alike, who had to evacuate their homes. So it's been a very multi-layered challenge in order to meet the needs of the people of Israel. And that's where Vision for Israel has come to the forefront, networking together across the country with as many others as possible in order to meet the needs of people. And this is all from both security concerns to safety concerns to welfare concerns to even to the children who have lost their education and schooling. Welcome back, friends. We're out of time, but I want to continue the tradition of ending with some good news, and it's somewhat ironic this week. When the start of this campaign against Iran started on Friday morning, one of the first things that happened was the closure of Ben Gurion and Ramon international airports. This left hundreds of thousands of Israelis who had been outside the country unable to get home. But even as Iranians have struggled to leave their cities in this situation, all those Israelis have struggled to get home. And they've found some very creative routes. This included making their way to Cyprus and then taking passage on whatever kind of boat they could find which was going to Israel. So once again, I can only speak for myself, but it makes me so proud, and it makes me love my country, Israel, so much to see how determined my fellow Israelis are to come home when we're in trouble and need their help. And so I want to ask you to pray for all the families who have suffered somebody in the loss of their family. Iran has murdered many of our citizens, and we've had nearly over 1,000 people injured. So on that note, until next week, pray for the peace of Israel, for the peace of Jerusalem. I'm Barry Segal, and this has been another edition of VFI News from Israel. God bless you and shalom.